The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silverdale, Wyoming Territory, as Harrison Lawson's boots kicked up small clouds of dirt with each determined stride. The year was 1877, and like most frontier towns, Silverdale had sprouted almost overnight with the promise of new railway connections. Harrison pulled his hat lower against the afternoon glare, the weight of 6 months' absence from his 3-year-old daughter Lily heavy on his shoulders as he approached the doctor's office where he'd been told they were staying. Harrison had never intended to be gone so long. When the cattle drive to Cheyenne had ended, he'd found himself pulled into another job and then another, each promising enough money to finally build the home his daughter deserved. But now, standing on the boardwalk outside Dr. Williams' place, he felt the familiar knot of doubt. Would Lily even remember him? "You just going to stand there all day, cowboy?" a voice called from the doorway. Harrison turned to see Dr. Williams, a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose, gesturing him inside. "They're in the back room. The little one's been asking for you since she heard you were coming to town." Relief flooded through him. "She remembers me then. Of course she does. Katherine's been good about keeping your memory alive." Harrison removed his hat as he stepped into the cool interior of the doctor's office. Katherine O'Brien had been a godsend after his wife Sarah died birthing Lily. As Sarah's closest friend, Katherine had stepped in to help care for the infant while Harrison struggled with grief and the harsh realities of raising a child alone on the frontier. "Thank you for taking them in, Doc," Harrison said quietly. "Katherine's been a blessing around here. Never seen a woman with such a way with the sick and injured. Now go on back, they're waiting." Harrison moved down the narrow hallway, heart hammering against his ribs. The door to the back room stood slightly ajar, and through the opening, he caught sight of them. Katherine was seated in a rocking chair by the window, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. On her lap, curled against her chest, was Lily, her small frame rising and falling with the even breaths of sleep. Katherine's hand gently stroked the child's dark curls just like her mother's had been. The floorboard creaked beneath Harrison's boot, and Katherine's eyes lifted to meet his. Those eyes, green as summer grass, widened in recognition, but she didn't move, careful not to wake the sleeping child. "Harrison," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. Harrison couldn't speak. The cowboy saw his daughter sleeping in her lap, and he knew there was no letting go now. This moment, this vision of the two of them together, crystallized something he'd been feeling since long before he'd left for the cattle drive. Katherine wasn't just his daughter's caretaker. She was the heart of what little family he had left. "I'm home," he finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. Katherine's eyes shimmered with tears. "For how long this time?" "For good," he said, crossing the room to kneel beside the rocking chair. "If you'll both have me." Lily stirred then, her small eyes fluttering open. She blinked sleepily at Harrison, and for one terrible moment he thought she might not recognize him. Then her face split into a smile that was pure sunshine. "Papa," she cried, launching herself from Katherine's lap into his arms. "You came back." Harrison caught her, the familiar weight of her in his arms like finding a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. "I sure did, little one, and I'm not going away again." Over Lily's head, his eyes met Katherine's, and the look that passed between them held questions neither was ready to ask aloud. But there was time for that now. Harrison had made sure of it. The next few days passed in a blur of reunion. Harrison had taken a room at the modest boarding house in town while he figured out next steps. Each morning, he would join Katherine and Lily for breakfast at the doctor's residence, where Katherine had been living in exchange for helping with patients. "Papa, watch me." Lily called, skipping along the boardwalk ahead of them as they made their way toward the general store on Harrison's 4th day back in town. "I'm watching, darling," he called back, smiling at her exuberance. Beside him, Katherine walked with her hands clasped before her, her green calico dress rustling with each step. "She's grown so much," Harrison said softly. I've missed too much of her life already. Katherine glanced at him. You were doing what you thought was best, trying to provide. And what did it get me? More miles between us while you were here doing the real providing. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Katherine, I need to thank you properly. What you've done for Lily, for me— Hush, she interrupted, her cheeks coloring slightly. Sarah was my dearest friend. Caring for Lily has been no burden. Still, Harrison insisted, I want to make it right. I've saved every penny from these months away, enough to buy that parcel of land outside town and build a proper home. That's wonderful, Harrison, she said, though something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, perhaps? I want you to help me plan it, he continued. You know what Lily needs better than I do these days. Before Katherine could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Raised voices, then the unmistakable sound of a pistol being cocked. Harrison instinctively stepped in front of Katherine, his eyes darting to find Lily. Get inside, he ordered, pushing Katherine toward the nearby mercantile where Lily had already disappeared inside. Stay with Lily. Katherine hesitated only a moment before hurrying into the store. Harrison turned toward the disturbance, his hand hovering near his own pistol. Two men stood facing each other in the street, one swaying slightly clearly deep in his cups despite the early hour. You cheated me, Maxwell. The drunk man shouted, his pistol wavering dangerously in his hand. The other man, Maxwell, apparently held his hands up placatingly. Put the gun down, Jenkins. You lost fair and square. Harrison recognized Jenkins as one of the newer arrivals to town, a drifter who'd been hanging around the saloon since before Harrison had returned. He didn't know Maxwell, but the man's steady demeanor suggested he wasn't looking for trouble. Sheriff Thomas emerged from his office down the street, his hand resting on his own holstered weapon. That's enough, Jenkins. Lower that gun now, or you'll spend the next month in my jail. Jenkins swung his weapon toward the sheriff, and Harrison knew things were about to go very wrong. Without thinking, he lunged forward, tackling Jenkins just as the man pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, splintering wood from the saloon's awning post. They hit the ground hard, Jenkins struggling beneath Harrison's weight as the sheriff rushed over. I've got him, Sheriff Thomas said, kneeling to secure Jenkins' wrists. Good work, Lawson. Harrison stood, brushing dust from his clothes. Just didn't want to see anyone get hurt. Papa, Lily's voice rang out, and Harrison turned to see her pulling Katherine from the mercantile doorway. Katherine's face was pale with fear, her eyes wide as they darted between Harrison and the subdued Jenkins. It's all right, Harrison called, walking toward them as the sheriff hauled Jenkins to his feet. Everything's fine now. When he reached them, Lily threw her arms around his legs and he lifted her up, holding her close. You were brave, Papa, she whispered, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Over Lily's shoulder, Harrison met Katherine's gaze. The fear in her eyes was giving way to something else: admiration, relief, and something deeper that made his heart skip. You could have been killed, Katherine said quietly, but I wasn't, he replied simply. And no one else was hurt either. Katherine reached out then, brushing dust from his shoulder with trembling fingers. The touch, though brief, sent warmth spreading through his chest. We should get Lily home, she said. I think we've had enough excitement for one day. As they walked back toward the doctor's residence, Lily chattering animatedly between them about her papa being a hero, Harrison couldn't help but notice how Katherine stayed closer to his side than before, as if the day's events had shifted something fundamental between them. That evening, after Lily had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Harrison and Katherine sat on the doctor's small back porch. The night was clear, stars spreading across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. I meant what I said earlier, Harrison said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. About the land and building a house. Katherine nodded, her fingers working nimbly at the mending in her lap. It would be good for Lily to have a proper home. And what about you? Harrison asked, the question that had been burning in him finally finding voice. Would it be good for you too? Katherine's hands stilled. What are you asking me, Harrison? He turned to face her fully, gathering his courage. I'm asking if you'd consider making it your home too. Not just as Lily's caretaker, but as my wife. The mending slipped from Katherine's fingers to the porch boards. Harrison, I know it's sudden, he rushed on, and I know I have no right to ask after being gone so long. But today, seeing you and Lily together, knowing what could have happened if that bullet had found its mark. He took a deep breath. Life's too short and too precious to waste, Katherine. I've wasted enough time already. Katherine looked down at her hands. Is this just gratitude? For caring for Lily? No, Harrison said firmly, though I am grateful. But this is about the way my heart feels when you smile. About how, even miles away driving cattle, I found myself thinking of you as much as I thought of Lily. About how, when I walked into that room 4 days ago and saw my daughter sleeping in your lap, I knew there was no letting go of either of you ever again. When Katherine looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Sarah always said you had a poet's heart hiding under all that trail dust. Is that a yes? Harrison asked, hope rising in his chest. It's an I need time, Katherine replied gently. This isn't just about us, Harrison. Lily adores you, you're her father. But I need to be certain that what you feel for me is real and lasting. I couldn't bear to become part of your family only to have you realize you've made a mistake. Harrison reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. I understand. I'll give you all the time you need. But my feelings won't change, Katherine. They've only grown stronger with time and distance. Katherine squeezed his hand before withdrawing hers. Then time won't hurt anything, will it? The next morning dawned with a plan taking shape. Harrison rode out to look at the parcel of land he'd been saving for, accompanied by Mr. Peterson, who ran the town's small bank. It's good land, Lawson, Peterson said as they surveyed the 5 acres just outside of town. Good water source, enough timber on the north side for building needs and flat enough for a proper house and barn. Harrison nodded, envisioning the home he would build. A wide porch where Katherine could sit and sew in the evenings, rooms enough for Lily to have her own space and perhaps, someday, siblings to share the land with. I'll take it, Harrison said, turning to Peterson. How soon can we draw up the papers? Come by the bank this afternoon. We can settle it then. By midday, Harrison had arranged to purchase the land and spoken with Thomas Jensen, the town's best carpenter, about beginning construction on a modest but comfortable house. He strode toward the doctor's office with purposeful steps, eager to share the news with Katherine. When he arrived, however, it was to find the normally peaceful office in a state of controlled chaos. Dr. Williams was hurrying about gathering supplies while Katherine efficiently packed them into a medical bag. What's happened? Harrison asked, standing in the doorway. Doctor. Williams looked up briefly. Accident out at the Murphy place, barn raising gone wrong, several injured. I'm going with him, Katherine added, her face set with determination. Mary Murphy sent word that one of the children was injured too, and she's beside herself with worry. Harrison nodded. I'll come with you. You might need an extra pair of hands. The doctor looked relieved. Could use the help, especially if we need to transport anyone back to town. Within minutes, they were in the doctor's wagon heading for the Murphy farm, which lay some 5 miles outside of town. Lily had been left in the care of Mrs. Williams, the doctor's kindly wife, who had promised an afternoon of cookie baking to keep the little girl entertained. The journey was tense and mostly silent, with Dr. Williams occasionally issuing instructions about what they might need to do upon arrival. Katherine sat straight-backed beside Harrison on the wagon bench, her medical bag clutched tightly in her lap. You've done this before, Harrison observed quietly. Katherine nodded. Many times. Dr. Williams has been teaching me. He says I have a natural gift for healing. Harrison studied her profile, admiring the quiet strength he saw there. You're remarkable, Katherine O'Brien. A touch of color rose in her cheeks, but before she could respond, the Murphy farm came into view. The half-raised barn stood as testament to the accident. One section of the frame had collapsed, and a group of men were still working to clear the fallen timbers. As soon as the wagon stopped, Katherine and Dr. Williams were moving, heading toward the farmhouse where the injured had been taken. Harrison followed, carrying the heavier of the doctor's bags. Inside, the scene was one of organized confusion. Mrs. Murphy, a stout woman with graying hair, directed them to the various injured parties. 3 men lay in the front room with injuries ranging from a broken arm to a deep gash in the leg. In a back bedroom, a young boy of about 10 lay pale and still on a bed, his mother hovering anxiously beside him. "He hasn't woken up," Mrs. Murphy whispered. "Something fell and struck his head." Dr. Williams immediately went to the child, while Katherine began assessing the men in the front room. Harrison moved between them, fetching water, holding lamps for better light, and offering strength when limbs needed to be set. As the afternoon wore on, Harrison found himself increasingly impressed by Katherine's competence and compassion. She spoke softly but firmly to the injured men, her hands steady as she cleaned and bandaged wounds. When one of the men, a young farmhand barely out of his teens, began to weep from the pain, she sat beside him, her hand cool on his forehead as she spoke words of encouragement, until the doctor could attend to him. By evening, the most serious injuries had been treated. The young boy had awakened, groggy but alert, much to everyone's relief. 2 of the men would remain at the Murphy farm to recover, while the third, the one with the serious leg wound, would return to town with them for further treatment. As they prepared to leave, Katherine approached Harrison, who was helping the injured man into the wagon. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You were a tremendous help today." Harrison shook his head. "I just followed instructions. You and the doctor did the real work." "Still," she insisted, "not many men would have stayed through all of that." She gestured vaguely toward the farmhouse, where the cries of pain and smell of blood had been all too real. "I'm not many men," Harrison replied simply. Something shifted in Katherine's expression, then a softening, a recognition. "No," she agreed, "you certainly are not." The ride back to town was slow and careful to avoid jostling their patient. Night had fallen by the time they arrived, and after helping get the injured man settled in the doctor's examination room, Harrison and Katherine stepped out onto the porch, both exhausted. "I should check on Lily," Katherine said, though she made no move to go inside. "She's probably asleep by now," Harrison replied, "and likely spoiled rotten by Mrs. Williams." Katherine smiled, the weariness in her face giving way to genuine amusement. "Undoubtedly." Harrison reached out, gently taking her hand. "You were amazing today, Katherine. The way you knew exactly what to do, how to comfort those men even while treating their injuries." "It's what anyone would do," she demurred. "No," Harrison said firmly. "It's what you do, it's who you are, and it's one of the many reasons I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the night air between them, more honest than he'd intended to be so soon after his proposal. Katherine's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in surprise. "Harrison," she began, but he shook his head. "You don't need to say anything. I know you asked for time and I'm giving it to you. After today, I wanted you to know the truth of how I feel." Katherine looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. The moonlight silvered her features, making her look almost ethereal. "Thank you," she whispered, "for your honesty and your patience." Before he could respond, the door opened behind them and Dr. Williams appeared. "Katherine, I need your assistance with Mr. Parker's bandages, and Lawson, Mrs. Williams asked me to tell you that Lily is sound asleep in the spare room if you'd like to look in on her." The moment broken, they separated, Katherine following the doctor inside while Harrison lingered a moment longer on the porch, his heart full of feelings he was only beginning to understand the depth of. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Construction began on Harrison's house, and he divided his time between helping with the building and taking odd jobs around town to supplement his savings. Every evening, he would join Katherine and Lily for dinner, and afterward, once Lily was in bed, he and Katherine would sit on the porch talking until the night grew cool. Through these conversations, Harrison learned more about Katherine than he'd ever known before. How she'd come west from Boston after her parents died, determined to make a new life for herself. How she'd met Sarah on the stagecoach and formed an instant friendship that had brought her to Silverdale. How she discovered her aptitude for medicine while helping Dr. Williams during an influenza outbreak 2 winters past. In turn, Harrison shared parts of himself he rarely spoke of: his childhood on a struggling farm in Missouri, the loss of his parents to the same fever that had taken them within days of each other, his years working cattle drives across the territories before settling briefly in Silverdale, where he'd met and married Sarah. "What made you stay?" Katherine asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "After so many years of wandering, what was it about Silverdale that held you?" Harrison considered the question. "Sarah, at first," he admitted. She had such dreams for this place, could see what it might become when it was barely more than a few buildings and a lot of hope. He turned to look at Katherine. "And then, after she died, it was you. The way you stepped in to help with Lily, how you made sure I didn't completely fall apart with grief. I knew then that whatever future I might build would have to include you in it." Katherine's eyes softened. "I didn't realize you felt that way back then." "Neither did I, not consciously," Harrison replied honestly. "It took leaving to make me understand what I was really leaving behind." As summer progressed toward autumn, the house began to take shape. Harrison had designed it with Katherine's input: 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen with windows that would catch the morning light, a living area centered around a stone fireplace, and the wide porch he'd envisioned from the start. Lily was enchanted by the whole process, racing around the construction site whenever Harrison would take her to see the progress, pointing out where her room would be and asking endless questions about when they could move in. "Will Miss Katherine live with us in the new house, Papa?" Lily asked one afternoon as they rode back to town. Harrison, seated behind her on his horse, tightened his arms slightly around her small frame. "Would you like it if she did?" Lily nodded vigorously. "Yes, then she could read me stories every night and teach me to make biscuits like she does." "Well," Harrison said carefully, "I've asked Miss Katherine to marry me and be your new mother, but she hasn't given me her answer yet." Lily twisted to look up at him, her small face serious. "Why not? Doesn't she love us?" Harrison smiled. "I think she does, little one. But sometimes grown-ups need time to be sure about important decisions." "Well, I'm sure," Lily declared with all the certainty of her 3 years. "I want Miss Katherine to be my mama." Harrison dropped a kiss on the top of her head. "Me too, Lily, me too." That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Harrison recounted the conversation to Katherine. They were sitting on the porch swing, gently rocking back and forth in the cool evening air. Katherine laughed softly at Lily's forthrightness, but Harrison could see the emotion in her eyes. "She's such a dear child," Katherine said, "so much like Sarah in her determination." "And like you in her kindness," Harrison added. "She adores you, Katherine, as do I." Katherine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. "The house will be finished soon," she finally said. "Another 3 weeks, Jensen thinks," Harrison confirmed. "Just in time for the cooler weather." Katherine turned to face him fully. "Harrison, there's something I need to tell you, something that might change how you feel." Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "You can tell me anything, Katherine." She took a deep breath. "Before I came west in Boston, I was engaged to be married. His name was Edward Blackwell, from a good family with connections to my father's shipping business." Harrison remained silent, waiting for her to continue. 2 weeks before our wedding, I found him with another woman. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Said that once we were married, he expected me to turn a blind eye to his diversions, as he called them." Katherine's voice had grown tight with the memory. "I broke the engagement, of course. My parents were mortified not by his behavior but by my refusal to accept it as the natural order of things." "They were wrong," Harrison said quietly but firmly. Katherine nodded. "I know that now. But at the time, It seemed like my entire world had collapsed. After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Boston, so I came west with what little inheritance they left me. I swore I would never again put my happiness in a man's hands. Harrison reached out slowly, covering her hand with his own. And now, Katherine said, meeting his eyes, I find myself terrified because my happiness is very much tied to you and Lily. If you were to change your mind, or if this life we're building isn't what you truly want. Katherine, Harrison interrupted gently, I am not Edward Blackwell. I can't promise we'll never disagree or face hardships, but I can promise that my heart belongs only to you and Lily. It has for longer than I even realized. Tears glistened in Katherine's eyes. I believe you, Harrison. That's what scares me the most, how much I want to believe in this future with you. Harrison moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. Then believe in it. Say you'll marry me, Katherine. Say you'll be my wife and Lily's mother. For a breathless moment, Katherine simply looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing every feature. Then, slowly, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Harrison Lawson. Joy surged through Harrison like a physical force. He leaned forward, claiming her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Katherine's arms went around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Katherine O'Brien. And I love you, Harrison Lawson, she replied, her voice sure and clear in the night. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Lily served as flower girl, scattering petals from Katherine's small garden with gleeful abandon. Dr. and Mrs. Williams stood as witnesses, along with Sheriff Thomas and several other townspeople who had come to regard Katherine with deep affection during her time in Silverdale. Katherine wore a dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Harrison thought she had never looked more beautiful than when she walked toward him down the church aisle, her eyes fixed on his with a certainty that matched his own. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the saloon, which had been transformed for the occasion with bunting and flowers. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by the women of the town, and someone produced a fiddle, filling the air with merry music. As evening approached, Harrison found Katherine sitting at a table, watching as Lily danced with Dr. Williams, the little girl standing on the doctor's boots as he guided her in a slow circle. Happy, Mrs. Lawson? Harrison asked, taking the seat beside his new wife. Katherine turned to him, her smile radiant. Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Lawson. Harrison took her hand, bringing it to his lips. The house is ready, he said. Jensen finished the last of the interior work yesterday. We can move in tomorrow if you'd like. Katherine's eyes widened. Truly, I thought it would be another week at least, Harrison grinned. I may have offered Jensen a bonus if he could finish early. I wanted to surprise you a proper wedding gift. Oh, Harrison, Katherine breathed, leaning in to kiss him softly. It's the most wonderful gift. Actually, he said, reaching into his pocket, that's not your only gift. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and placed it in her hand. This belonged to my mother. I've been carrying it with me all these years, waiting for the right time to pass it on. Katherine opened the pouch, tipping its contents into her palm. A delicate gold locket gleamed against her skin, its surface etched with a pattern of intertwined roses. It's beautiful, she whispered. Harrison reached over, gently opening the locket to reveal 2 small compartments. One held a tiny daguerreotype of Lily as an infant, the other was empty. I thought we might add another picture someday, he said. Perhaps of the children we might have together. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. I would like that very much, she said, closing the locket and holding it close to her heart. The next day they moved into their new home. Harrison carried Lily over the threshold first, the little girl squealing with delight at finally being in her house. Then he returned to the wagon where Katherine waited, sweeping her into his arms despite her laughing protests. It's tradition, he insisted, carrying her through the doorway and setting her gently on her feet in the front hall. "Welcome home, my love." Katherine looked around, taking in the sturdy furniture Harrison had commissioned, the cheerful curtains she had sewn herself in anticipation of this day, the stone fireplace already laid with wood for their first evening fire. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace him. "Everything is perfect." That night, after Lily had been tucked into her new bed with promises that yes, her toys would all be unpacked tomorrow, and yes, Papa and her new mama would be just down the hall if she needed anything, Harrison and Katherine retired to their own room. Katherine stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit land that stretched before them. Harrison came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and drawing her back against his chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his lips finding the sensitive spot just below her ear. Katherine sighed, leaning into his embrace. "I'm thinking about how far we've both come, about all the twists and turns that led us here to this moment." Harrison turned her in his arms, looking down into her upturned face. "Do you have any regrets?" "Not one," she replied without hesitation. "Every step, every joy and heartbreak led me to you and Lily. How could I regret any part of that journey?" As he lowered his lips to hers, Harrison silently echoed the sentiment. The path had been long and often difficult, but standing here with Katherine in his arms, their future stretching before them full of promise, he knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. 5 years later, the early morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting golden light across the worn wooden table where Harrison sat nursing a cup of coffee. Outside, the sound of children's laughter drifted in from the yard where Lily, now 8, was showing her 3-year-old brother Henry how to feed the chickens without getting pecked. "Not too much, Henry," Lily's patient voice instructed. "Just a little in your hand like this." Harrison smiled into his coffee. Lily had taken to big sisterhood with the same determination she brought to everything in life, appointing herself Henry's protector and teacher from the moment Katherine had placed the newborn in her arms. The sound of footsteps on the stairs drew his attention, and he looked up to see Katherine descending, their youngest 1-year-old Sarah, named for the mother she would never know, balanced on her hip. "Good morning," Katherine said, her smile as bright as the sunlight streaming through the windows. At 28, she was more beautiful to Harrison than ever, motherhood having added a soft fullness to her figure and a depth of contentment to her eyes that made his heart ache with love. "Good morning to my favorite ladies," he replied, standing to take Sarah from her arms. The baby went to him willingly, her small hands immediately reaching for his face, patting his cheeks with delighted recognition. "Pa," Sarah said clearly, one of the few words in her limited vocabulary. "That's right, clever girl," he praised, pressing a kiss to her forehead before settling her on his hip. "Did you sleep well?" This last question was directed at Katherine, who had moved to the stove to pour herself a cup of coffee. She turned, leaning against the counter with the steaming cup cradled in her hands. "I did, though this little miss was up before dawn," she replied, smiling at Sarah. "I think she heard the rooster and decided it was time for everyone to be awake." Harrison chuckled. "She's going to be just like her big sister, always the first one up and ready to start the day." Katherine came to join him at the table, her free hand reaching out to rest on his forearm. "The doctor will be arriving this afternoon," she reminded him, "to check on Mrs. Peterson's broken wrist and to bring those medical texts he promised me." In the years since their marriage, Katherine had continued to assist Dr. Williams, her natural talent for healing growing with experience and study. When Henry was born, they had converted one of the outbuildings into a small infirmary where Katherine could attend to minor injuries and illnesses without having to travel into town, especially in bad weather. "I remember," Harrison assured her. "I'll make sure to be back from checking the north pasture fence by then." Katherine nodded, her eyes drifting to the window where they could see Lily now helping Henry collect eggs, her patience impressive as the little boy insisted on carrying each egg himself to the basket. "She's so good with him," Katherine murmured. "She learned from the best," Harrison replied, his gaze full of meaning as it rested on his wife. Katherine's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "I sometimes wonder what Sarah would think seeing us now," she said quietly. It wasn't the first time they had spoken of Sarah. Rather than allowing her memory to be a shadow between them, they had chosen to honor her by keeping her alive in their family's stories and traditions. Lily knew that she'd had a mother who had loved her very much, even if she could not stay, and that Katherine had been her mother's dearest friend before becoming Lily's second mother. "I think she would be happy," Harrison said with certainty. "Knowing that Lily is growing up surrounded by love, that you and I found each other, I believe she would consider that the best possible outcome." Katherine's eyes grew misty. "I think you're right. She always wanted everyone she loved to be happy." Harrison set Sarah on her feet, the toddler immediately toddling toward a wooden toy horse that sat in the corner of the kitchen. He moved to stand behind Katherine's chair, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "I have something to tell you," he said, his voice warm with suppressed excitement. Katherine tilted her head back to look up at him. "What is it?" "I've been corresponding with that doctor in Cheyenne, the one Dr. Williams told us about. He's agreed to take you on as a proper apprentice for 2 weeks this summer. You'll have access to his library, attend his lectures, and observe his more complex procedures." Katherine's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "Harrison, that's incredible, but what about the children?" "The farm, I've thought of that," he assured her. "Mrs. Williams has already agreed to come stay with us to help with Sarah and Henry. Lily and I will manage the rest. It's only for 2 weeks, and it's the opportunity you've been hoping for." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Harrison knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Say you'll go. Say you'll allow yourself this chance to grow your skills. You've given so much to this family, to this community. Let us support you in this." Katherine leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding what this means to me. Always," he promised. The moment was interrupted by the kitchen door bursting open as Lily and Henry returned from their chicken duties, Lily carrying the basket of eggs triumphantly while Henry followed with one additional egg clutched carefully in his small hands. "Look how many we got, Mama," Lily announced. "And Henry didn't break a single one." "I big boy," Henry declared proudly, presenting his egg to Katherine with a flourish. "Yes, you are," Katherine agreed, accepting the egg with appropriate solemnity. "What clever, helpful children I have." As the kitchen filled with the cheerful chaos of breakfast preparations, Harrison stood back for a moment, watching his family. Katherine moved efficiently around the space, helping Henry wash his hands at the basin while directing Lily on setting the table. Sarah sat on the floor, happily babbling to her wooden horse. The scene before him was so far from the life he had imagined for himself in those dark days after Sarah's death, when the weight of grief and single fatherhood had seemed an impossible burden to bear. Yet here they were, 5 years into a marriage that had brought him more joy than he had thought possible, with 3 beautiful children and a home filled with love and laughter. He thought back to that pivotal moment, standing in the doorway of Dr. Williams' back room, seeing Katherine with Lily sleeping in her lap. How clearly he had known in that instant that there would be no letting go, not of his daughter, and not of the woman who had kept both their hearts beating during his absence. "Papa, you're daydreaming again," Lily's voice broke into his thoughts, her small hand tugging at his. Harrison smiled down at his eldest child, the living link to both his past and his future. "Just thinking about how lucky I am, little one." Lily rolled her eyes in the dramatic way she had recently adopted, though her smile betrayed her pleasure at his words. "Mama says breakfast is ready, and if you don't come now, Henry will eat all the biscuits." "Well, we can't have that, can we?" Harrison replied with mock seriousness, allowing himself to be led to the table. As they gathered around the morning meal, Henry immediately reaching for a biscuit as predicted, Sarah banging her spoon in anticipation, and Katherine shooting him a look of such complete happiness that it nearly stole his breath. Harrison sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances. For brave hearts willing to risk love again. For the family they had built together, on a foundation of mutual respect, deep friendship, and an enduring love that grew stronger with each passing day. And most of all, for that moment of clarity 5 years ago, when a tired cowboy had seen his daughter sleeping peacefully in the lap of a remarkable woman, and known with absolute certainty that his wandering days were over, that he had, at long last, found his way home.